thank you so much for joining us. This is Belinda Pina with Footwear Plus magazine, and I'm thrilled to introduce to you the Footwear Plus Retail Strategy Series. We're kicking off our first interview today with a retail strategist, Liza Amlani. She's the principal and co-founder of the Retail Strategy Group and the Merchant Life. So Liza, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Started. Thank you. I'd love to get started with having you share a little bit about what you do and your background.
Yeah, absolutely. My background is as a retail insider, as I like to put it. I spent about 22 years in industry as a merchant, product developer, and planner across brands like Ralph Lauren, Club Monaco. I've worked with a few department stores. And then I shifted into this world of consulting and strategy, really focusing on helping brands and retailers increase profitability and improving organizational effectiveness across merchandising, product creation, and go-to-market strategies.
Amazing, wonderful. Well, so as we're launching this retail strategy series, there are so many things for us to cover. And Footwear Plus recently put a reader survey out to our industry. And there were many different themes and topics that were put out there, and private label was certainly one of them, and the opportunity which exists for retailers to tap into that first cost opportunity. And I think it's really just about, where do I begin? How do I get started in doing something like this? So I thought you were the perfect fit for this. This is certainly, right up your alley.
It is.
I guess just as a starting point, why should a small independent retailer consider getting into private label?
Well, I think the beauty of a small to medium retailer is that they're so close and connected to their customer and their community. And the one thing about bringing in private label is really understanding the gaps in the current assortment and how you can leverage consumer insights and what your community is telling you that your assortment needs. And that's how you can possibly fill those gaps in the assortment with private label, expanding into categories like accessories or essentials, and truly increasing not only your gross margin, but volume drivers.
Absolutely. So in general, because it seems a bit daunting, right? You think, okay, private label, do I have to travel across the world, really, right, to find the right partner? And it seems like there are just many steps, and that it could be perhaps, a bit expensive. But, what are the primary benefits of really getting into private label when you start thinking about taking that step?
So I'd say once you determine what categories you want to fill your assortment gaps with, so let's say it's accessories or even a running short or a basic tee to go with your footwear assortment, it really depends on what that category is. Once you determine that, what I would do first is talk to your customers, understand what colors they would be interested in, what type of styles and aesthetic would work for them. If it's socks to match, their shoes, it could be anything. And then the wealth of knowledge that's out there with your current vendors that you're working with, I would start tapping into them, especially the ones that you've worked with for many years that you've already built a deep trusting relationship with, and tell them what you're up to. Make sure that they understand that you're not there to compete with them by any means. In fact, you're there to layer in on top of their assortment that they're providing you with. And it's going to enhance and tell the story. And that's really what, something like accessories or essentials would do. After talking to your vendors, understanding what they're doing and how they're manufacturing, and maybe they even have relationships with vendors and manufacturers that could help provide you with a private label assortment where you could meet their minimums, because that's always a scary question to ask, factories, is minimum order quantities and if you're able to meet them. But once you get around some of that, you can start looking at things like trade shows, which always has an abundance of sourcing factory partners and private label vendors. There's also quite a bit out there in terms of, the FDRA may have a list as well. So there's a lot of resources out there once you start thinking about what your private label assortment needs to look like.
I love the idea of, taking, of course, your customer, your client, and kind of utilizing them almost as like a think tank or a focus group, but then also tapping the vendors that you're already working with to say,
Yeah,
hey, do you offer, private label? And I know for a fact that so many of the European brands that we see here in the US, many of
yeah,
them do. They don't necessarily maybe market that, but behind the scenes, they do, a lot of first cost manufacturing, for more than just their own brand. So
yeah.
that's very interesting. So once you're ready to get started, lay out those additional steps. What might that look like once you've had those conversations and you feel good about
Yeah.
moving forward?
So in most cases, you are going to work with an assortment plan. So once you figure out what category you want to buy into, where you're going to get that product from, and who you're going to work with, and the timing that you want to bring that product in, you're going to start to think about where do you want to fill in the private label assortment within your larger assortment. Once you do that, you can start thinking about quantities. And, for the most part, most retailers and brands, especially in a small to medium range, are building their own assortment. So they're very close to their customers, but also their vendors. So working with them, understanding what quantities would work best, and start testing with your community, with your consumers that are loyal to you. I think that's a great way to begin. Like I said earlier, that's the beauty of working with a small to medium retailer or brand, is that they're so connected to their community. And consumer insights is something that, the larger brands, it's so hard for them to grasp because they're so far removed from their consumer. So working with your consumer, understanding what they need, and testing the market with them before you buy hundreds of quantities. That's what I would say. I mean, the last thing we want to do is sit with excess inventory, and you want to make sure you're buying into the right thing. So, really leveraging those consumer insights and those relationships with your community, I'd say that is really the best way to start.
What would you say to someone who might be a little bit concerned with minimums, with the conversation
Yeah.
of minimums?
So there's a lot of wiggle room, I'd say, these days. There's a lot of activity happening within the supply chain, from sourcing to factory partners. And I'd say that they're more willing than ever to partner with brands and retailers on building the best assortment, because it is a win-win. So I'd say that there's a lot more opportunities out there to partner with factories and private label vendors than there ever has been before. And working with maybe other brands that are looking to also meet minimums. That's also a strategy that I've used in my past. So I think that there's always an option. I think you have to really understand, what are you willing to test within your market, what quantities will work for you, and go to the vendor and the factory partner and ask them what they're willing to do for you. Because for the most part, I'd say a lot more folks are willing to work with retailers and brands on breaking some of those minimum order quantities.
That's a great point. So let's get into challenges. If someone were
Yeah.
to try and foresee, a couple of the perhaps roadblocks or speed bumps, what might they be?
So outside of minimum order quantities, I'd say, if the product doesn't work, and the last thing we want to do is, deal with markdowns and excess inventory. So I would say a way around that is really just to start testing the market with small quantities, and using your consumers and your community as your focus group to make sure that you're buying into the right product and it's something that the consumer actually wants. Filling the assortment gap with product that is maybe not provided by your best-selling vendors. That's something that will speak to your community and your consumer. And I think that's where we want to put the shopper in the center of everything we do. But I would say testing as much as possible without buying into large quantities would be the strategy that I would go for.
Amazing. And so that brings us to knowing that you have something successful on your hands. What are the different gauges that you'll probably see and experience?
Yeah, customer feedback, number one. Number two, high sell-through, and number three, gross margin. These are the three KPIs that I would focus on, which most retailers are looking at these KPIs, but I think consumer feedback is one that needs to kind of move up to the top of the list.
Wonderful. And so last question, I'm just curious, we hear a lot of the conversation on, manufacturing closer to home. Are there any particular, countries or perhaps, manufacturing partners that you might steer someone in the direction of if they're going to go at it on their own, not necessarily attached with a vendor?
Yeah, of course. There's a lot more opportunities, in nearshoring than we've ever seen before. In Mexico, in Brazil, there's also many manufacturers within the United States. And I think that now more than ever, those resources are being made readily available by folks, that have resources under like the FDRA, or there's a lot of lists out there. And I think that even, a quick Google search will give you a lot of resources as well. The fact is that nearshoring is something that a lot of the bigger brands are also looking into, and that's why we're seeing a lot more activity in that space. So I'd say there are more options than ever, and you don't necessarily need to rely on overseas for production as much as we needed to in the past.
Wonderful. And as you've said, a bit more elasticity perhaps in the market with different companies having the willingness to work with newer, smaller clients.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Belinda. Thanks for having me.
Of course. This is Belinda Pina with Footwear Plus Magazine. Thank you again for joining us for the Retail Strategy Series. And of course, thank you to Liza Amlani for joining us as well. If you'd like to get in contact with Liza for more information, her information will be provided following our interview.